Imagine that after weeks and weeks of waiting for the right data, of lengthy discussions about reasonable assumptions, of trial and error programming, and of poorly performing spreadsheets. Yes, after weeks of stress, you come up in the end with a very simple table of results summarizing a complex problem. Like a table like this one, you're very proud of, and you think these numbers need an applause. I mean, don't you think that this is one of the easiest things in the world to understand? 9 numbers, one digit after the comma, everything in million, and 5 of these numbers are sums. When I showed this to a lawyer who worked on the project, all I could see in his eyes was panic. I was about to explain, and I could just see more panic and less listening. This true story almost became my trauma, and it should never happen to you. Hi everyone, bonjour, hallo zusammen, hey, hola. My name is Caroline Gregoire, and I'm thrilled to be here today to talk to you about 5 nuggets for risk-free communication. I have a vast experience working as an actuary and risk manager in different fields, life, non-life, and pension, in different contexts, in international settings, and in different leadership positions. I now give people like you the edge to reach peak performance in my work as mentor, coach, and speaker. As a former figure skater, I know how important it is to have a sharp edge if you need to skate on rough ice or on thin ice. I help my clients with issues relating to leadership, communication, resilience, strategy, and culture. Originally, I'm from the Montreal area in Canada, which you may hear, and I live and work in 4 languages: English, French, German, and Swedish. My current base is Portugal, and I need to admit that I struggle to learn Portuguese though. Coming back to my failed attempt earlier to impress a lawyer, I could have thought, you know what? I showed him the table. I mean, he can just look at it more and he should understand. Sometimes maybe you also think in your communication, well, I wrote it in my email, or I said it during the meeting, or it's written on page 18 of my last presentation. But it's not enough to think the message is out. It's out in the universe and it will fall on the head of somebody who will understand it one day. As the sender of a message, you need to make sure that the message gets into the heads and into the hearts of those who receive your message. And this gets more and more important in situations where actuaries are working in non-traditional fields, where the profession is not well known or understood, and where numbers are now being used to quantify something that was not quantified earlier. Or simply in situations where actuaries need to communicate with non-actuaries. So keep in mind this wisdom, the ninja wisdom. The message needs to get in, not just out. And this is where the 5 nuggets come in. Back to the story. This happened when I was working as a pension consultant in Sweden. I had taken over a project from a colleague who had left the company. Our task was to calculate 2 kinds of compensations, let's say 1 and 2, for 2 different groups of individuals, let's say A and B. Our clients had hired an external law firm to determine how these compensations from a legal point of view had to be interpreted. And this was described in a 10-page document. And this is where the lawyer comes in. Together with a colleague, we go to meet him to present our results. It's the first time that I meet the gentleman. We're ready to present a robust version of our results. After some small talk, we start our presentation, and the first 3 slides were like an introduction with some bullet points about the background, about the situation, about general assumptions, kind of a summary of the 10-page document that we had received from the lawyer. And also we had a bullet point with the total sum of the compensations that we had calculated, the 8.3 million that you saw at the beginning. I turned to the fourth slide to show my table of results. That little table I showed you at the beginning with nothing around, no mathematical symbols, no curves, nothing complicated. And that's when I had to skate on thin ice. All I can see in the eyes of the gentleman is panic. He can hardly look at the table, and he keeps on showing me his 10-page document, telling me that this is how the compensations need to be calculated. And I perfectly agree with him, and I nicely tell him that my table of numbers is the translation of his 10-page document. He shows me the document again. I want to explain more, and I notice that he's not listening anymore. He's not aggressive, he's not impolite, he just shows resistance for this table. Maybe the numbers were much larger than he had expected. Maybe there were too many numbers on that one slide. Maybe I don't know, I don't understand, there's a glitch in the air. My colleague realizes this too, and he acts as a bridge between me, the actuary, the number cruncher, and the lawyer, the word lover. My colleague has a law background, a good understanding of numbers, and he had already met this person before. So I let him repair whatever damage had been done, and I decide that I'll wait before I speak again. I'll stop here the story to analyze what happened. I was very well prepared. Communication was always very important for me, even 15 years ago. And I had discussed the presentation with other people before, with my colleagues, and not just about the calculations, but also about the structure, about the vocabulary used, and so on. Let's see what I will come up with. You need to know that the first time when we meet someone, you and I, unconsciously, we scan this person. Within a few seconds, we, in our subjective interpretation, we know exactly where to put that person based on two criteria. On the likability axis, I like, I don't like, or somewhere in between. And then the credibility axis, seems competent, credible, or not really. So we put a dot here for Patrick, a star there for Anna, a X here for Mr. Lee, and a ring there for Mrs. Mueller. We don't have a second chance to make a first impression. Where you go to a meeting where you are recognized as the specialist, because let's say it's written on the agenda, you may want to think about playing more on the likability aspects, which would mean to have more open hands, to smile more, to have more movement in your head, in your tone of voice, also to have expressive eyes. If on the other hand you go to a meeting where you know that it's more important to be credible than likable, you may want to play with more firmness in your movement and in your tone of voice as well. Note again that it's not only one or the other, but just be aware of the first impression that you want to make. In my story, I was introduced as the actuarial specialist, so I was already credible from the start. In the eyes of the gentleman, did I appear not likable enough, too distant, hiding behind my numbers, not being enough team player? Maybe, I don't know. But I give you here the first nugget, and it is prepare for a solid first impression. All communication models I know mention something like that every communication has a relationship and a content aspect. Actually, it's word by word what the communication theorist Paul Václavic in his second axiom said. He also mentioned that you cannot not communicate. And he says that the relationship aspects determine the content aspects. Clearly, it means that if you don't like someone or if there's a conflict between the two of you, it will be difficult to agree on the content. So when you know that and you want to agree on the content, of course, and you know though that the relationship is rather weak, work first on building that relationship. Be curious about the other person with the goal of understanding him or her. Use the same curiosity that you use when you're trying to solve an actuarial problem to understand the other person. You will then increase the probability of improving the relationship and of agreeing on the content. Now in my story, I hadn't met the gentleman before. While we did start with some small talk, maybe I didn't give enough thought on how to connect with him. My colleague who knew him already was maybe in a better position to present him the content, or maybe he was just luckier. And now I have nugget number 2. Build a strong relationship with your audience, with your colleagues, with your business partners, with the recipients of your message. There is one aspect of communication that can easily be forgotten, but it is also essential. I have a question for you. Tell me in the chat. When you listen to someone, do you listen with the intent of A, preparing your answer, or B, of understanding what is being said? When the gentleman kept on showing me his 10-page document, he was not listening anymore, nor was I. I was just trying to find answers to each of his statements because I could not understand where this was going. Listening is such an important part of communication, and we tend to neglect it and to let it to the more introverts. Make it a practice every day to actively listen with the goal of understanding. I mean, if this sounds too difficult, just try with 10 minutes per day and increase that time every week after that. Notice what it does in your communication and in your relationship with others. So now we have nugget number 3, and it is when you listen to someone, listen with the intent of understanding. I told you that this story happened when I was living in Sweden, and I spoke Swedish during this meeting. At the time, it was not my native language, and still today, it is not my native language. If you live and work in another language than your native language, you know that after a while, it almost becomes like a second skin. Still, sometimes in the details, in the nuances, you don't find the exact words, or you think you found them, but they get interpreted differently by native speakers. I often get this question, Carolyn, I work in English, but it's not my native language. And I have the feeling that I'm not as good as the other ones because of that. It's like a hurdle or a complex that I carry around. How can I get over that? I had been living in Germany for 2 years approximately, and one of my colleagues was French, so I would speak French with him in the office. And one day I say something and he said to me, "Oh, this is really cute how you said this word." Because if you don't know, there's a difference between the French that is spoken in France and the French that is spoken in Canada. The next day, I go to the doctor and I just start to speak. I just say I have, I just say in German, ich habe. And the doctor says, "Oh, are you from France?" "No, I'm from Canada." The day after, we are in a meeting at work with colleagues from New York. And at one moment, I say something in English and somebody says, "Oh, it's so cute how you speak." And I thought I didn't speak with the intent of saying something cute. The day after, I called a good friend in Canada and we hadn't spoken with each other for maybe a year actually. And after 20 seconds, she says to me, "Oh, wow, you speak normal." And I said, "Please repeat this." You're smart enough, you're intelligent enough. You've proved it as you live and work in a foreign language. So concentrate on your strength, stop worrying about your accent, and make peace with the fact that you'll never be a native speaker in that foreign language. If you do have weaknesses, and these have been noticed over and over again by people who care for your development, of course, I suggest that you take lessons to improve your language skills so that you reach a new level of knowledge and of confidence also. In my Swedish story, maybe I didn't speak good enough, sophisticated enough, gracefully enough. I don't know. If you work in an international environment with colleagues who have another native language as yours, be aware of these false friends. As an example, in German, the verb kontrollieren means to check, but someone may translate it with the verb to control, and then it gets a totally different meaning, and it can lead to very big misunderstandings. If you work in your native language with colleagues who also have this language as their native language, there are plenty of situations where there can be misunderstandings as well. I mean, you talk about the details and the CFO about the big picture. You just see the problems and your boss wants to have a solution. Or you're new in a company and you're shocked at how informally people engage with each other. Now, you and me, actuaries, we love numbers. Otherwise, you wouldn't have chosen this profession. You may not be so thrilled when it's about writing long texts. I mean, who likes to write guidelines or even worse, like documentation for programming? You know, we let the word lovers deal with the words, and we, the number crunchers, deal with the numbers. Here, don't get me wrong, we're not solely one or the other, but some people may be at the very end of the axis. In my story, I believe that I met someone who was at the other end of the axis, especially because he was showing me his 10-page document all the time. I thought I was somewhere maybe in the middle because I had started my presentation with a 3-page of introduction. But maybe for him, I appear to be very, very far away on the number side. Keep in mind also that there are best estimates that between 3 and 6% of the population suffer from dyscalculia. I'm not saying that I met someone who had this condition, but I just want you to be aware that this is a possibility when you communicate with non-actuaries. You may deal with people who don't have problems with the numbers, but they don't know all the technical terms that you are using. For some people, only hearing present value or discounting it's enough. They just don't want to listen anymore. When I was calculating pension liabilities according to IAS 19, as you know, it's the client who's responsible for the assumptions. So every year we would meet, we would still discuss about interest rate, inflation, future salary increases, and mortality tables. And I had been working with a client for 5 years when one day he admitted that the first time I had spoken about mortality tables, he thought it was so morbid, and I had not even noticed. So when for you maybe it's in your day-to-day language to say mortality table, for other people it may just be bringing them closer to the grave. In my story, the 10-page document was very useful. It was the guidance for the calculation of the compensations, and it was also a guidance on which words, what vocabulary I was allowed to use. So I actively made sure that I was not using a lot of technical language. As nugget number 4, I will say develop a deep appreciation for the topic of languages, may it be linguistic, cultural, or technical. Every time you communicate, your audience turns on a radio station that is called Within. What's in it for me? Like you are doing right now as I'm talking to you. Your audience will give you their attention when they know what's in it for them. Otherwise, they won't listen, they won't remember, and the message will not get in. So, to finish my long story with the lawyer, after the meeting, there were a few items that still needed to be agreed upon. Remember, we were working for the same client, so we had the same radio channel on. My colleague, who had been managing the project from the beginning, continued to manage the communication. So I was preparing the answers and he was sending them from his email account. Does this sound familiar? So as nugget number 5, use with him what's in it for me in all your communications. When I work with clients, we make sure that we take all these factors into account, all the while looking at also the small details because they can make a huge difference. Believe me, over the years, I've replayed this meeting over and over again in my mind, and I wished it had been recorded because I could show you some extracts. This gentleman and I, we never met again, but I always believe that things happen for a reason. In the end, he inspired me to share this story so that you also can learn from it. As a summary, remember the Minja wisdom. The message needs to get in, not just out. And the message can get in when 1. You prepare for a solid first impression. 2. You make sure you build a strong relationship with your audience. 3. You listen with the intent of understanding. 4. You develop a deep appreciation of the topic of languages. And 5. You use the with him channel. When you understand better, you bring the polarities closer. You make all the axes that we saw smaller, and you decrease the likelihood of misunderstandings, bringing you closer to a risk-free communication. And it can happen that in the end, you will agree to disagree, and this will be the power of your story. I leave you with this, and it's based on Paul Václavic. You cannot not communicate, so you may as well make it risk-free. Thank you so much for being here today. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn using the QR code. I'm glad to engage with you in the chat, and I will start by asking you one question. What is your biggest challenge that you meet in your communication with non-actuaries?